Good morning and welcome back. And you just had the press review, but right now we're going to be discussing a very important issue that sometimes we sort of neglect, which is our own feelings, our own emotions, depression and anxiety. And with us to discuss more on the topic is Dr. Raouf Al-Hamni, who is a physician. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to make a couple of statements.
Definitively.
The first statement, I owe an apology to my Egyptian audience who thought that I am going to speak in Arabic. I misunderstood Ustaza Rabab, so I'll be speaking in simple English, as simple as possible. The second statement is that although I am a physician, I am not a psychiatrist. However, during my medical studies, I was very much interested in this topic of depression and anxiety, psychological disorders in general. The second thing is that I work for international pharmaceutical companies as a director of medical information and training, and I had several courses in Germany and in the United Kingdom in this respect. The third point is that I myself was a depression case.
You used to be
You were clinically depressed?
Yes. 30 years ago, I had depression.
So let me take from here and
Yes.
let me start by asking you when it comes to depression, because just as Rahma said, after the press and after reading what is going on around, most of the people are depressed and frustrated. Tell us, how can you overcome something like this? Because now people are not only depressed because of their personal stuff or personal things, but also from what is going on around.
Let me be frank on this issue. This issue has two sides, a political side and a medical side. The political side definitely includes security, economical, moral,
we can't do anything with this.
Yes.
Let's take the other side of the depression.
That's right.
How to work on it.
That's right. First, let's define what is depression. It's not just feeling bad or feeling down, because most of the people have ups and downs all the time. Our mood is not a straight line. It is always ups and downs. It might happen in the same day, might happen several days in the same week, or it might even happen in one season and not in another season, okay? That's normal. So we can't just take it on the face value that everyone who says that I'm depressed, that he is depressed in the full sense of the word, of the medical word of depression. No, this is normal to feel bad from time to time. The situation we are in now in Egypt is frustrating. People are feeling hopeless almost. But this is a different issue. I am going to tackle anxiety and depression. And the other issue is not my domain.
I think also to add another terminology, because they are demotivated.
That's right. They are demotivated. So let's see what can be done in order to motivate them. To motivate them, we need a better political solution. This is not my domain. I am trying to help people who are already depressed.
But what about starting with oneself? Because at times when it comes to these sort of diseases, let's say anxiety, depression, you become your own worst enemy, and therefore you lack.
Very true. And it creates a vicious circle.
Indeed.
Right? So let's define the most important types of depression. There are three main types. First one is due to loss of something dear to one, like a spouse, like a child, like a job, like money, like health. This is loss. The second type is related to anxiety. Excessive and long anxiety leads to depression. This is another type. The third type is not our domain because it is the psychiatrist's domain, the major depression. There is a genetic role in it, and it has to be helped medically, mostly by psychiatrists. Now let me tell you one thing. Severe anxiety leads to depression, and depression in turn aggravates anxiety. So we have here a vicious circle. We have to cut it. It is easier to cut it by alleviating anxiety than to tackle depression, even by medicines, because medicines that treat anxiety work very fast. But medicines that treat depression take between 1 to 3 weeks. So the patient must be very understanding and very patient as well.
But the early, let's say, usually when we talk about it, we say that the early diagnosis is something important in any disease.
Absolutely.
Is it the same with anxiety and depression?
Absolutely.
And how can we know, just because, just as you mentioned at the beginning, whenever anyone has a problem, he usually says, I'm depressed.
Yes.
Yeah. This is a normal talk. I tell you something. If conditions in Egypt suddenly, miraculously, tomorrow became different, prices are
Perfect,
affordable
utopian.
and cheap, and security is perfect, and no more harassment, and all these symptoms will disappear suddenly. But depression will remain if it is a disease. So you see, we are talking about depressive symptoms in the Egyptian people and not depression as a disease. There is a difference. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So, as you rightly pointed out, early diagnosis is very important. It is very clear for the family to identify any change in a boy or in a child. This is very important, because 10% of the cases of anxiety happen in children. You believe it or not?
How is it? Can you just
But sometimes
explain
these
us?
things are dormant, because we see these things with, for example, veterans who just came out of war. You don't really understand the symptoms, and then suddenly a suicide, for example.
Suicide is the extreme case of
hopelessness.
And that's typically a depression issue. But I'm talking about anxiety in children.
So how can we tell, for example, just give us an example to understand it?
Yes. If a child suddenly, his performance in school drops down, suddenly, that's a warning sign. If a child who used to be playful and talkative suddenly became silent, there is something wrong. The parents must notice that. But on the other hand, there is something very important the parents must do. They should have a continuous dialogue with their children. This is very important in the bringing up of children. And unfortunately, only very few people do that in Egypt, to treat their kids as friends. Because in the long run, those children, when they find themselves in a problem, they will talk with their parents instead of going outside to talk to their peers, and they might get a bad advice, right? But if they were used to have a dialogue with their parents...
And also they will be able to express themselves.
Exactly. So that's a very important point that parents should take a notice, that they start a dialogue with their children as early as possible, suitable to their age, but not to leave them until things deteriorate, because the man and the woman at the house are too busy and too frustrated from life and neglecting their most important asset, their children.
You had previously mentioned that you yourself were caught up in this cycle.
Yes, and I'm not ashamed to say
Could
that.
you please let us know more
important.
about it? How did you get yourself out of it? What happened?
Of course, I resorted to the help of a very big psychiatrist. Should I say names? Is it important? He is Professor Okasha, who is the best in Egypt. And I also called on my own resources to try to help myself, because one has to help himself, not to succumb.
How did you get to the point where you said, I have a problem, I am going to tackle this issue?
I'm the anxious type, and this anxiety led to this depression. I am almost a perfectionist. This is not good, because I can't change the world. I have to accept that. I am also a rigid person. That's not good. I have to be flexible. Rigid people suffer. Perfectionists suffer. Discreet people suffer. Lonely people suffer. So all these people must be helped by the family and also by the friends. You see? The family and the friends should play a major role in this respect. Because if someone is discreet, we must encourage him to talk. He might not talk with me as his father. So I call his intimate friends so that he might talk with them.
Create the environment for him.
Create the environment for him. A perfectionist must understand that he cannot change the world, right? We have to understand that. Everything by the minute, everything by the second, everything by the millimeter.
Being accurate, I think this is one of the main
Being
issues.
accurate is not bad, but being perfectionist is really...
No, and being accurate as well, because I know a lot of people, they have this problem because they know how to manage everything just as you mentioned, but they cannot control the circumstances surrounding the environment. So they are fully depressed because things do not move in the way they are planning.
And those that are the perfectionists, they must understand there are limitations, right?
Being flexible is important.
Being flexible is also very important. I know someone who has been told that we are going to move to another area. The area is so beautiful. He told them, no, I cannot move. I cannot leave my place. I have been living here since 30 years.
But this is something else. This has to do with the change. People who do not accept change.
Those we call rigid people.
Yes.
He doesn't change his chair in front of the TV. There are five or six chairs. He sits on his own chair. And if even he receives a guest and the guest sits by mistake on his chair, he will tell him, excuse me, this is my chair. Not only that, he will arrange the remote controls in front of him in a certain order. And if someone wants to tease him and change one of them in a different direction, he would...
This means he is a rigid person?
Yes, very rigid.
And this is
prone to
a specific
anxiety and
disorder.
depression. We have to encourage him to try something new, even if it is simple at first. It must be step by step. We can't take him all of a sudden to a drastic change. We have to take him bit by bit. He has to move from this rigidity.
Well, sir, our final question could be around how can people in Egypt start to adapt to the situation, leave their comfort zones, understand that they have a problem and acknowledge that they have an anxiety disorder, because sometimes there's a lack of awareness with regards to these mental diseases.
Unless people know that their physical health is dependent on the psychological health, both will suffer. Because psychological disorders reflect themselves on the body. They will become weak, they fatigued, pains everywhere, headache everywhere. Are these people, could we rely on these people to influence change? So we come to a vicious circle. He is moody, so he cannot do change. And because he cannot do change, he is again moody. We have to break this vicious circle. He must have a will, first of all. And this will should be helped by the family and by the friends and by a lot of other things. So we must
But when can we tell that he needs a physician?
Oh, that's very important.
It's very quickly, time is running up, but this is an important question.
It's a very important
because partly
question.
I'm just like what you're saying.
A psychiatrist, let me say, is a must at the very beginning. And not necessarily this psychiatrist will prescribe medicines, not necessarily, unless this is endogenous depression. But sometimes the loss which leads to depression could be helped by people around the patient himself, right? And an anxiety could be helped also by the people around the patient himself. So the doctor in the first place will not start prescribing drugs, or he might prescribe drugs in certain doses for certain periods of times, consistent with every type of the depressive disorder or the anxiety disorder. So this is this wrong?
No.
I was depressed, I went to a physician and he helped me, and I recalled on my resources, and my family helped me, my friends helped me, and so I became okay. Or